sickening thrum of sirens is the clarion call of the Demons of Slaanesh. As they glide across the field of combat, they exude grace and terror, their very being bringing the innermost secrets and deepest fears of those who face them blistering to the surface. With arrays of cruel blades and whips, they slice through flesh, darting in and out of battle with the gruesome precision of an artist. The demons are at once unbearably beautiful and hypnotically grotesque, and are able to wither the willpower of even the most battle-hardened warrior with a mere glance.
Hey everyone, my name's Guy, you're watching Midwinter Minis, and in this video we're going to be painting up some Slaanesh demons with a twist. If you haven't already seen it, I have a long-running battle report series called the Start Collecting Deathmatch going, where 16 of the main 40k factions battle it out in a custom-built arena using only what's inside their Start Collecting boxes. We've got only 2 games and 4 armies left to play: Slaanesh Demons versus the Imperial Guard and Tau versus Admech. All need built and painted, and I like to have the battle report models looking particularly nice, or at least pretty unique, so I wanted to try something new. But what? Only dry brushing? A John Blanche style grimdark vibe? A speed painting challenge? Oil paints? Only using an airbrush? 100 coats of art coat on every model? Well, for this episode, I let our awesome supporters over on Patreon make the big decision for me, and they overwhelmingly voted for insanely bright colours. Pretty apt for the acolytes of excess. To find a colour palette, I just did an image search for garish colour swatch and found this neon-style, offensively eye-popping scheme. Between us, Hattie and I have over 500 paints to choose from, so we looked through our collection and found the paints most similar to the swatch, cut out some card squares and primed them white, ready for testing. For the turquoise, we compared Vallejo Blue-Green, P3 Arcane Blue and Citadel Ahriman Blue. For the violet, Green Stuff World Fluorescent Violet, Citadel Genestealer Purple and AK Intense Purple went head to head. The 3 magentas we compared were Vallejo Fluorescent Magenta, Warcolors Pink 4 and Citadel Pink Horror. The midnight purple colours we tried were Citadel Phoenician Purple, TT Combat Throwing Shade and Green Stuff World Malefic Purple. And finally, the radioactive greens we tried out were Coat d'Arms Scorpion Green, Citadel Moot Green and Green Stuff World Fluorescent Lime Green. I gave each piece of card 2 thin coats of each paint, and this will not only help us determine the true colour of these paints, but also how well they apply, smooth or streaky, and how see-through they were. We weighed up their performance and then chose the swatches that not only looked great on their own, but worked well with the other colours too. And the winners are Citadel Moot Green, Vallejo Blue Green, Citadel Genestealer Purple, Vallejo Fluorescent Magenta, and Green Stuff World Malefic Purple. Quite surprising. Now, this is where I made a bit of a stupid mistake that made this whole project, and obviously this video, take way longer than it should have. While I was working on another video, I asked Hattie to crack on and build the models in this box ready for painting. She kept asking whether or not she should glue the models to the bases, glue the riders to the dragons, glue the characters on the chariots, and never having built or painted Slaanesh models before, I was just like, yeah, just go for it, just build them all and glue everything together and we'll start painting tomorrow. Little did I know what a huge mistake that was, and you'll see why soon. For the bases, I had a little idea I wanted to try out from working on the gore effects on the recent Veil Touch video we did. This Yoo-hoo glue sets in a really fun way when you agitate it as it dries, so I did a little experiment to see whether or not it could look like some kind of mysterious, chaotic, warp-infused material. And yeah, it looks really gross, like a liquidy nether realm covered in spiderwebs. Keep in mind this glue is cheap. You can get it in the UK for £4 for 125 millilitres. That's about 3p per milliliter. Compare that to a Games Workshop texture paint that's £4.75 for 24 millilitres. That's almost 20p per mil, almost 7 times the price. This would be a great way to quickly create a flesh world base, but I've done that before with the Tzeentch demons. Instead, I wonder if it would look cool with colour shifting paints. Yeah, I reckon that'll look pretty weird and warpy under fully painted models. We added the Yoo-hoo glue to all of the bases and gave it a little push around with some toothpicks, and then to get the maximum colour popping vibrancy, we primed all the models with white plastic primer. Sign of the times here though. When I first started Midwinter Minis in 2018, plastic primer cans from Halfords were $5.99. I had to restock recently, and they've not only changed the packaging, they're now $10.99 each. Almost the same price as Citadel rattle cans now. Everything got multiple light passes with this in all directions until there was a fairly solid coverage. The two riders on the chariots fell off during the process, so I took this as a bit of a blessing in disguise and mounted them separately with a tiny dab of superglue on plastic cups. This should make painting the chariot a little bit easier. Now, a little bit of trial and error here before the proper painting begins. I wonder if I could create a similar green to the one that we're using in the swatch, but with a metallic undertone for the chariot. I mixed some emerald green ink into silver ink and gave it a go. I'm not super convinced right now, but I did give Hattie the pleasure of threading the needle and painting all of the really tricky bits on the chariot, while I started painting the Seekers. The top halves of their bodies, the scaly bits, are going to be painted green. 2 thin coats of moot green, and we're ready for some shading. Warp Lightning, thin 50-50 with contrast medium, should darken those recesses without altering the main colour too much. And once that was dry, I mixed moot green with some TT Combat Spotlight Yellow to make a brighter, more saturated dry brush colour to buff on some vibrant highlights to the scales. For the muscular bodies of these Seeker Dragons, I chose Genestealer Purple. Oh man, why did I want these to be fully built before painting? Just don't. If you're about to start building some Slaanesh models, particularly the chariot, keep all of the elements separate. Build the riders, the dragons, and the chariot separately, and then combine them at the end when they're painted. So many awkward angles. And Genestealer Purple definitely needs a second coat over white. Super. To shade the bodies, Druchii Violet all over with a decent sized brush. I love this shade. I think it's one of the best Games Workshop make in my opinion. Now to highlight, Vallejo Squid Pink is a magic paint, and it's very opaque, perfect to add to any deeper pink or purple, or even magenta, to lighten it without losing too much saturation. Quite a crude, chunky highlight to begin with, not really edge highlighting, just more picking out top-facing muscular bits with a bit of sheen, and bordering some of the darker edges. There's a lot of models to cover here, so I don't want to labour things too much, and you won't notice super fine details in a battle report anyway. Everything is in the way of everything, and I've just realised that I've basically made these Seeker Dragons look like Warhammer Barney.
The Imperium is a weak old man, ready and waiting to be broken and torn asunder by us.
And they're Slaanesh models, so why wouldn't the dragons have boobs? As I'm really not convinced by that green metallic we used earlier, I felt that just a super bright, untinted silver might work well to break up the dragons from their riders for the saddles and adornments on the dragon bodies. The essential way of working when you have complicated models like this is to paint the deepest parts first, so that's things like the underbellies, deep areas of the saddle, stuff like that. And that way you won't have to worry so much about making mistakes and fixing paint later, like on the riders' bums for example. Coat d'Arms Ink Armor Wash will be a perfect shade for this. It doesn't really stain at all, it just hunts down the recesses and makes them black. Very striking and nice high contrast. To cut through the darker, more powerful colours, I used
Pale sand?
Pale sand. And then, for a bit of retro flair, I used the intensely vibrant old 90s Citadel Flesh Wash to stain the horns. Wowee. That is some seriously powerful colour. A totally normal, natural flesh colour, as demonstrated by Hattie. I'll come back to that and highlight away some of the potency, but first, while it dries, let's paint the saddle straps. I mixed black and that midnight purple together to create a really deep dark colour that'll hopefully split but complement the two main colours on the body, while being nice and distinct. Man, this is so tricky. Right, now the horns and toes are dry, so another thin coat of pale sand in streaky strokes should do the trick. There's a lot of elements to paint here, so the fewer steps we can get away with while still looking passable, the better. For the tongues, we went for the vibrant fluorescent magenta. And while that dried, a little bit of black paint carefully applied to their spooky little eyes. A few of the dragons lacked a bit of punch on the green bits, so I gave them another dry brush of pure yellow this time, just to get a bit more contrast going. And yeah, what a difference. Nice. To shade the tongues, we used Volupus Pink contrast paint, thinned with a bit of medium. I think the combo of that fluorescent paint and the contrast medium is making it weirdly hydrophobic, so we might need to fix that later. We'll see. Speaking of fixing things, that green metallic just isn't working. It's going to look weird. We tried out a couple of metallics and settled on Citadel Iron Warriors for its dark, non-clashing tone, but to keep things interesting we went with Grey Knight Steel for the spinning blades, and yet again another case of Hattie's nails foreshadowing a main colour we used in a painting video. It's getting spooky now. With the dragons mostly done, I fixed up any paint splodges on the white base coat on all of the riders to get them ready for their eye-popping coat of magenta. The standing infantry got a few coats with the airbrush, but the mounted models had to be manually painted with a brush. Again, with Volupus Pink mixed 50-50 with contrast medium, we shaded all of the bodies of the demonettes all over. It does change the colour slightly, but with some magenta highlighting we can bring it back. While I was doing that, Hattie used Space Wolves Grey and Athematic Blue to shade the chariot elements. Now, I'd quite like the demonette claws to look different to their skin, maybe more necrotic and nasty, so I first shaded them from the forearm down with Druchii Violet, and then when that was dry I added black wash, Nuln Oil in this case, on the claws themselves. Once that was dry, I mixed magenta with squid pink to give it some more opacity, and dry brushed the skin of the demonettes. This should quickly add some highlights while keeping the recessed areas that nice, rich, deeper violet. Yeah, looking pretty good. The one on the right has been dry brushed and the one on the left is just the wash. A nice, subtle, but worthwhile difference in my opinion. Let's crack on with that malefic purple and use it to base coat all of the clothing and trinkets of the demonettes. This is kind of the first time that we'll have to be really careful about the edges between the colours here, as the pink will be really hard to fix if we make a mistake. The good thing is though, it's very opaque, so one coat of this malefic purple should be fine. Now onto the hair, and here's where things really start to pop I think. That Vallejo blue-green really makes everything spark, and even just that against the magenta is quite explosive to the eyes. To shade the clothing without altering the colour too much, we diluted Shyish purple with contrast medium in equal parts, and then carefully applied it all over the clothes. It picks out the deep recesses pretty nicely. I thinned some Pterodon turquoise with contrast medium to make it a quick shade for the hair. Maybe it was a little bit too dark as it's taken a lot of the vibrant pop away from the colour difference, but we can fix that in a second. A dry brush of blue-green again should fix most of it, and a manual highlight of a few strands with blue-green mixed with a little bit of white should get that hair looking lush and radiant again, while still being quite detailed. The demonettes have lots of little fun trinkets on them, earrings, anklets, bracelets, and charms, so we used Vallejo aluminium to pick most of these out. The dark shade left behind by the Shyish purple should act as a nice shade for those elements too, so we can almost one-step this stuff. With almost no paint on the brush, you can also just drag your brush across sculpted detail like chainmail. When it's already painted a dark colour, it just accentuates the raised parts, creating the illusion of more effort taken. Also, I didn't catch it on film, but I bloody dropped the exalted chariot on its bum, and some of the spiky wheels broke off. 10 out of 10 Warhammering guy, well done. I feel like it would be weird to do a Slaanesh painting video without using Slaanesh Grey, so to add to the gross dead flesh vibe of the claws, I dry brushed them with this too. Okay, on the home straight now, just a few picky bits to go. The bases were painted black, ready for the colour shifting paints. Mad props to Hattie for somehow managing to paint the base under the crazy busy chariot model. The horns and the staffs were painted with Grey Knight Steel to match the vibe of the chariot, and I used Athematic Blue to shade all of that stuff. And then I tested out a few of the Green Stuff World colour shifting paints to see which one worked best with the colour scheme. And while they all look pretty cool in their own way after a few thin coats, we ultimately went with Cobalt Blue. Every model got 2 or 3 thin coats with this to build up the effect, and then I thought it would be fun to reach outside of the swatch for a few extra points of interest, mainly the whips of the Chariot Queen and the flag of the Standard Bearer. I fixed up the white undercoat to make things nice and poppy, and then grabbed my cadmium yellow ink and base coated all of these elements. One coat and done. The stuff is serious business. When that was dry, I mixed a bit of Volupus Pink into the yellow ink, which makes a really interesting orange shade, and then applied it to the flag. Once that was dry, I added another coat, a bit more directed, to shade the recesses and accentuate the folds of the fabric. Now, do you remember last year when I did that limited run of Chaos Midwinter Minis logo merch? No? Well, I did say it was limited. Anyway, it was designed by Christoph Speidel, who's made black metal style logos for Emperor, Metallica, Borknagar, Trivium, Nagaroth, and Rihanna. And yeah, this is his take on the Midwinter Minis logo. So let's try and make a miniature version of it. Because I'm working over yellow, which will be a nightmare to fix mistakes on, I sketched out the rough shape of the logo using thinned black wash, so it kind of just looks like a faint shadow. When I was happy with the dimensions, I came in with neat black wash to bulk up the shapes, and then I added a tiny bit of black paint into the black wash to make a final pass, safe in the knowledge that I wasn't really adding anything drastic, just boosting what was already there. Once that was sorted, I could finally take a breath, and then I mixed pale sand into the yellow ink to make some scratchy highlight colours for the fabric, catching the most sticky out bits of the folds and raised edges too. The demonette's toes and random horns were painted with pale sand, and then shaded with the contrast paint Skeleton Horde. To give the skin an extra pop of detail, I used squid pink to catch some of the defined musculature, just the top facing part should do, and also a little touch on their brows, noses and chins. The base rim's got a coat of black, and then the chariot demonette's got a quick snapping action to crack them off their mounts. Remember, quick and sharp snaps superglue much better than slow and strong. And then they got glued into place. And here they are, the glorious servants of forbidden excess, painted to satisfy the strange, perverted desires of our Patreon supporters. I'm pretty happy with how they turned out, even though at times this project definitely felt like actual torture. Just a reminder, don't assemble first. These models are perfect to be built in sub-assemblies. A few interesting things before I love you and leave you. I noticed there were lots of interesting spare parts on the sprues for this box that went unused. I think I'm going to try and kit bash a Demon Prince or HQ unit for this army at some point. Now, what do you reckon I should use as the basis of the conversion? I'd like to hear your model suggestions in the comments. Also, when I was painting these models, especially the dragons, I suddenly realised what they reminded me of. Do you remember Golden Axe? The shape and size and general feel of the dragons you can ride in that game looks so much like these Seeker dragons. Oh, and also the chicken leg dragon looks almost exactly like some of the Tzeentch demons. I reckon the sculptors at Games Workshop had been hitting Golden Axe pretty hard when they came up with these designs. And speaking of designs, I've added some products to our Teespring store with the black metal logo, so take a look at the link in the description. I found Teespring clothing to be not great quality, so there's no t-shirts or anything like that, but there's posters and mugs and other little trinkets for you to grab if you fancy it. Okay, that's your lot. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now. One more thing.